Welcome, this is Eric of the Journal Fodder Junkies, and this is a video about basic watercolor pencil techniques. The first technique is activating the watercolor pencil with water. So with this, I'm going to take a watercolor pencil, I'm going to draw down my shapes, and I'm going to press pretty hard with the watercolor pencil. So at this point, I'm just coloring or shading with the pencil. So I press down nice and hard, and I do a little bit of shading. I lighten up on my pressure to kind of fade that out a little bit. And with this piece, I'm going to just use a bunch of rectangles. Of course, you can use any shapes, words, letters that you would like to use. So I'm just going to fill up this paper using some rectangles. And then I'm going to go back and just make sure that I've kind of shaded everything out really well. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to take my paintbrush and I'm going to get a lot of water. So I really make sure I get a lot of water. I start out by painting in the blank area just to get the paper wet, and that way the pigment from the watercolor pencil is going to bleed into that wet paper. It's going to make for a better blend. And I'm very careful as I'm painting up against the edge. I like to keep those nice sharp edges, and I just work the pigment out, and if I need to, I get more water, and it gives me a nice gradual value transition. And I just continue doing this throughout the whole paper, and just really blending out the paint, the watercolor pencil as I go. So that water just really picks up that pigment and lets it dissolve, and I have this nice painterly effect. And so I'm just going to finish this up, and again trying to keep those nice sharp edges on those rectangles. And I just paint that out, really blending it together, going back, looking at where I might need to touch things up or blend the pigment a little bit more. And of course, make sure that you really rinse out your brush when you're done, and yeah, make sure you rinse out your brush when you're done. That way it's ready for the next color. Alright, the second technique is using watercolor paint to activate the watercolor pencil. With this, you want to make sure that you are using a contrasting color. So here I am using a green watercolor pencil, and just like before, I'm doing rectangles, and I'm kind of shading out the pencil. So I start off by pressing pretty hard, and then I kind of lighten up on my pressure to fade it out as I work. So just like before, I'm just filling up this space with these rectangles. Alright, so my space is pretty much filled, and again I'm just sort of shading around, putting down a little extra pigment. You really want to make sure that you get a lot of that watercolor pencil down so that you get some nice color transitions. And the key with this technique is that I am going to use watercolor paint. So I'm going to get a lot of water on my brush, and I'm just going to use a wash of watercolor paint. I'm going to use yellow, since yellow contrasts that green nicely. And just like with the water, I paint into the blank white space first, and then I go over, and you can see how that green really kind of picks up and blends into the yellow. Notice that I do wash out my brush before I get more yellow, because I have green on my brush, so now I've just picked up some of that green, and I can blend that around. But when I go to get more yellow, I want to make sure that I really wash that brush out so that I don't contaminate my yellow paint. And I just continue that all the way around, and that gives me some nice color blends with the green. So just remember, use a contrasting color. Sometimes people use a blue watercolor pencil and then they use blue watercolor paint, and you really don't get sort of that surprise, that nice color blend. So I just look around, see where I can kind of touch things up, blend things out, make sure I haven't missed any spots. And That's it. Alright, the third technique is activating with a water-based marker. So just a regular yellow marker. So just like the watercolor paint, with this I'm going to use a contrasting color. So I have a red watercolor pencil, and I'm still using those rectangles and just doing the same thing, but this time I'm not pressing down quite so hard. I find with the yellow marker that you don't need a lot of pigment, that the marker will help kind of blend the pigment, and the darker the pigment is and the more that you have, sometimes the harder it is to kind of blend it around. Also note that this sort of ruins the marker. The marker is going to get covered with the red pigment, so you really have to dedicate the marker to this purpose. So I'm just finishing up drawing the rectangles, and just like before, I'm kind of shading them out a little bit, just so that when I blend in the yellow marker, it will blend very nicely. So I just take the marker and I color it down, and as I go into that red, it picks up that red, and because the ink has water in it, it sort of dissolves that pigment and spreads it around just like the watercolor paint did. But what I notice is that this yellow marker is much more intense. You get a very bright color, whereas the watercolor pencil is a little bit lighter and not quite as intense. And I don't want to color everything in with the yellow marker, so I am leaving some spaces white, and I'm going to take care of that in a few minutes. Since this is a water-based marker, I can go back in with some water and help blend it around. So I just finish up with the marker, using that yellow marker to blend that red, and it kind of creates some of that orange. So I cap the marker, put it down, and then I'm going to take some water. And like I said, this is water-based ink, so if I touch the ink with the paintbrush, the ink will bleed. And so I can really fill in the rest of the space just by using my paintbrush, and I don't have to try to color the entire space in with that marker. So I just go around with the water, and I'm really just trying to blend that marker out, trying to soften it, trying to fill in all those negative spaces. And that's pretty much using the marker to activate or blend out the watercolor pencil. So I just make sure everything's nice and even, wash out my brush, and that's it. The final technique that I'm going to share is just dipping the pencil, the watercolor pencil, into the water. And what this does, it wets the lead of the pencil, the tip of it, and so then when you actually draw with it or color with it, it is a little more intense, looks more like marker, but the tip kind of dries out quickly, and so I need to make sure that I dip it back and forth. And I'm just putting down some really thick lines, and I'm just going to continue this all the way around, create my composition with it. But again, I'm dipping it into the water quite a bit. Now, one word of advice with this is that you don't want to sharpen the pencil now that the tip is wet, because the color part, the pigment part, is really soft because of the water. So I want to let it totally dry before I actually sharpen it, and it'll be less likely that I'll eat away the colored part of the pencil. So I'm kind of using the side of the pencil now to put down just a little bit more pigment around the rectangles. And this is going to help me out in the next step, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my paintbrush, and I am going to blend out some of this watercolor pencil. But because I dipped the tip, the color kind of stays in the paper more. It won't completely blend, and so those lines that I drew will stay there. But some of the pigment does get picked up on the brush, and I can kind of spread it around. So this step is completely optional, but I find that it's a nice way to try to fill that space. So I just go around, fill up that space, try to blend out the watercolor pencil, make sure that I haven't missed any spots. And that's pretty much it. So thank you very much for joining me, and please check out the website for a written instructions. Thank you.